welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we will be talking about the MenEngage Code of Conduct, and specifically about the updated version of the Code of Conduct that we're working on together at the moment. And we are centering the conversation on the title, Be the Change We Want to See. And how can the Code of Conduct help us to conduct ourselves in such ways and inspire us to really be the change that we want to see in the world. And I want to thank my colleague Oswaldo for bringing us together and helping us facilitate the session. So we will start just with a couple of tech matters. We would love to hear where you are from, where you're calling in from. So please do share your name in the chat box and say welcome in your own language. For me, I would say Goedemorgen, which means good morning in the Netherlands. It's morning where I am. I'm based in the Washington, D.C. area in the eastern part of the United States. So yeah, do say welcome, do say hi to everybody. Yeah, so for those of you who use social media, we are using the hashtag Ubuntu Symposium, and in Spanish, Symposio Ubuntu. Do share any thoughts and reflections that you have there, or any quotes from speakers. But we also welcome you actually to share your reflections in the chat box with us, not only outside on social media, but also here in the room, in the space that we have together. We would love to hear from you. And we will also have discussion time among all of us later on in the session, after hearing from some different speakers who have prepared some reflections. The session is being recorded, so even for those who are not able to be here with us at the moment, we'll later be able to view it online on our YouTube channel. And we will also keep this session as an inspiration for, and a resource for further conversation on the Code of Conduct. So it's really, we are creating a resource here together also going forward. So I haven't introduced myself yet. I'm Joni van der Zand. I work as co-director of the MenEngage Global Secretariat, and I'm originally from the Netherlands. And I already said I'm based out of the Washington, D.C. area at the moment. And I will be facilitating the conversation today. So let me also set the stage for a moment. Why are we doing this session? How will it unfold? And I'll share briefly about the speakers. So as we know, to be able to transform power structures, we require individual and systemic change, and change at all levels. Or we've sometimes said at the socio-ecological model, at every level we will need change. But individual change is an important part. And again, it's about being the change that we want to see in the world. So today that will be a bit more of our focus. About our individual behaviors and attitudes and how we conduct ourselves. And so one of the tools for sustaining change in alignment with our feminist principles, as MenEngage Alliance is committed to applying feminist principles, is how to integrate these in our code of conduct. And the code of conduct really reflects the values that members and partners of MenEngage Alliance commit to living by. And that means kind of living by, of course, in our work. So when we show up as, as professionals, and when we show up as MenEngage members, when we interact with each other, but also in our private lives, in our families, in our communities, as we believe that these spaces cannot be distinguished from each other. And we know that, we have high experiences for or expectations for ourselves. And we aim to meet these expectations on a daily basis, but it's not always easy to actually implement in practice what we have embraced at a principled level. And we think that the code of conduct really kind of helps us and supports us in giving us reminders about how we want to, what we have committed to, how to behave ourselves and how to conduct ourselves. So at a very practical level, the code of conduct is one of the key kind of accountability documents that we have as MenEngage Alliance. All MenEngage members are kind of required to conduct themselves in a manner that's consistent with the values and principles of the Alliance, and the code of conduct is a key element in that. All member organizations of MenEngage sign it. Excuse me. And we use it kind of to uphold standards, but we also use it when things don't go well, and when we realize that someone in the network hasn't conducted themselves in line with those principles. Then we can also go to the code of conduct and discuss violations. So and take build a response and take measures. So also from that perspective, the code of conduct is really important. And it's part of the package of the guiding principles and our accountability standards and our sexual harassment policy. And actually also we have anti-corruption policy as well. And I think that's also linked with this package. And the current version of the code of conduct that we have stems from 2014, when the MenEngage Global Steering Committee at the time approved it. It was in New Delhi in India, actually during one of the preparation meetings for the second, so the previous MenEngage Global Symposium. And so the question that we have for ourselves today is, of course, the world has changed since 2014, the world that we live in, and also the insights that we have about how society operates, the challenges, the unequal power dynamics, and unequal privileges in the world, and in our own communities, and within the MenEngage community as well. And so all of these kind of emerging insights are now in front of us, and we have to think through, how do we want to integrate these emerged insights into the updated code of conduct? And as I mentioned before, we have firmly committed to intersectional feminism and to that discourse, and working in integrating this in our principles and applying it in practice. And we're also committed to decolonize our practices and to work horizontally and to share power and to operate from a power with perspective. And we also have updated, I think, understandings of what accountability means, in particular in relation to the work on engaging men and boys in transforming patriarchal masculinities. And how does our work link with allyship, with feminist movement, with social justice movements more broadly? And all of these understandings, we're now thinking through what does that mean for our code of conduct? So maybe now I can share a little bit. Oh yeah, importantly, so the objective that we have and why we're having this conversation is not only to reframe the code of conduct, but in the process to strengthen our collective ownership over the code of conduct, by building it together. And so having this conversation today, but also the previous process and the process going forward of really involving MenEngage members, involving critical friends in what the contents and the implementation of our accountability standards and code of conduct should look like. So it's all intended to strengthen our collective ownership over these. So how the session will unfold, we will have Oswaldo Montoya, the MenEngage Networks Associate, our focal point in the MenEngage Global Secretariat for Strengthening Accountable Practices. He's really been leading on the coordination of all these processes, and he will share with us a high-level comparison between the current and the new draft of the Code of Conduct. And he'll also share about the consultation process that we've had and the critical feedback received so far. And then we are really thankful to be hearing from 3 MenEngage members who will also share their comments and reflections about the contents of the updated code of conduct, as well as their thoughts on implementation and application of it. So we'll hear from Kevin Liverpool, who is representing the MenEngage network in the Caribbean called Caraman. We'll hear from Sariaka Nantenaina and her colleague as well and let me hope that I can pronounce this well, and I just see that my document hasn't updated, but we're really thankful that another colleague from the network in Madagascar has joined us, and his name is Hatiana Erik Randjanomenjanahari. I'm sorry, I know I'm not pronouncing that correctly, but thank you for your patience with me, Haja. And together with Sariaka, he's representing the MenEngage Madagascar network. And we will have Bilkis Tahira, who works with Shirakat in Pakistan, and who's also been a long time involved in the MenEngage South Asia network, and is coordinator of the MenEngage Pakistan network. And then after hearing from the MenEngage, so these MenEngage members, will hear from Srilatha Batliwala. Thank you so much, Srilatha, for being with us today. And Srilatha works, excuse me, with CREA as a senior advisor on knowledge building, and also with Gender at Work as a senior associate. And Srilatha's work has been really influential, I think, in the feminist movement, thinking about feminist movement building, feminist leadership, women's empowerment. And she's been, very influential, her work also in MenEngage's shaping of what applying intersectional feminist principles mean in our work. So we'd love to hear from you as well, Srilatha. Thank you again for joining us. And then we'll have some time to discuss with you as participants what you all think about the contents of the updated code of conduct so far. Excuse me. And and what are your thoughts on the application and the implementation? So with that, pardon for my cough. It is going to happen a bit more often during this conversation. The reason being that I'm having a cold, so I'm quite fine. It sounds a bit dramatic, but I apologize for that. So with that, I would love to pass it on to Oswaldo to share a little bit about the updated code of conduct, what its contents are, and the process as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yoni, for that great overall explanation of why we are here and what we attempt to do. Thank you to our speakers and amazing colleagues and friends who are doing amazing work in their countries, in the region, worldwide for some of you. And we hope that this session becomes a good resource for advancing these conversations, and also part of the consultation process that I'm going to mention in my part of my presentation. And this is an important piece of that. And we are work in progress with these are ideas in progress, and we really need the collective wisdom, the wisdom of the global MenEngage village and beyond, in order to get this right or the best possible. So I want to share with you an overview of what has been our current code of conduct and the new proposal, the revised proposal that we have. And as Yoni mentioned, the current code of conduct was adopted by then the steering committee of the MenEngage Global in February in Delhi, preparing for the second global symposium. And it's made of 8 categories, the current code of conduct. You can see them, see the code of conduct in our website. There is a screenshot of the in where we are in MenEngage website. You click below on the code of conduct, and you see the full document there. It's about 2 pages. Basically, the content is the 8 categories are: 1, creating peaceful and equal professional environments. Second category, on promoting gender equality and social justice outside the workplace. A third one, on not discrimination, do not discriminate against others, be violence-free, prioritize ethical standards and safety and the well-being for all, avoid conflicts of interest, hold one another accountable, and ensure transparency at all levels. And some of the critique, some of the critical reflection that we have been gathering and considering, and this is part of the why we are coming here with a new proposal, are that, as you can see in the right side of this slide, there is a lot of overlap in these 8 categories. There is some repetition, and some overlap is fine, but sometimes we say the same in different categories and could be better organized, could be clearer. The titles don't necessarily reflect what is within the content. And each of these categories, if all of them important, we are not skipping none of them in terms of content, but there is, the way it is presented is a mix of behavioral expectation, mix of principle, institutional practices that we aim to, that we are committed, but all of them is in a mix in this current code of conduct. There is also a mix of what are expected from members and what is expected not to do. So that's why, and also being more aware about, as Johnny was saying, the current situation, the wake-up call when all of us were part of the witness and were also part of the Me Too movement, for instance, and the recognition that misconduct, problematic, harmful behaviors also happen in organizations that are supposed to be committed to peace, to justice. So recognizing that, we of course, we knew that many years before. That's why we are part of this struggle from many years ago. But still, the recognition that this is really a heavy issue and challenge, everyday challenge within our organizations. We thought that it is important to come up with a clearer, more explicit and organized way of convening what are our principles and how these principles translate in behavioral expectations. So the new code of conduct, the revised, still a draft. It's a draft code of conduct. It hasn't been approved. This is part of a consultation. So the new draft is much more focused on individual behaviors, on individual behaviors, considering that the accountability standards, the MenEngage accountability standards, and also the Declaration of Core Principles target more, address more the systemic practices, the institutional practices that we also aim to embody in alignment with our principles. So the code of conduct is more a tool for leaders at individual levels, because MenEngage are made of leaders. And so it's about how we as leaders are expected to conduct, to relate to each other. How are we expected to show up in all spaces of our lives, including work, family, community. And so it's divided into two sections. One is behaviors members and partners are expected to practice, and behaviors members and partners commit not to engage in. So it's the do's and the don'ts. And it just as an overall overview, and we will share the Google Doc in which you can read and discuss the specific of each of these points in the code of conduct. We will label them based on principles: respect, consent, fairness, ethical decision-making, transparency, self-reflection, and this is something that we are also promoting a lot, promoting more spaces for self-reflection, for inner work, so that we are really aware and conscious about our actions and decisions and relationships as gender beings, as human beings involving power dynamics. And also speaking up for justice, how can we really be upstanders and show off for others and for ourselves. So those are the labels for each of the new proposal in terms of the do's of the expected behaviors, and the don'ts, the behaviors that we propose, we commit not to engage in, are directly in opposition to each of these expected behaviors. So in some way, we're trying to articulate the opposite of respect could be seen as abusive behavior. The opposite of consent is about exploitation, abuse, sexual harassment. In terms of fairness, we see that many discriminatory practices are the behaviors that we commit not to engage. In terms of ethical decision, conflicts of interest is one of the, of course, of the don'ts. Same for fraud and corruption. So these are the don'ts, and the new draft elaborates on each of these behaviors that we commit not to, and we want to be very explicit about them. And finally, to give space to our speakers who are MenEngage leaders, and also to Srilatha wrap up, I want just to mention that this is part of the consultative process for revising not only the code of conduct, but also the MenEngage core principles and the accountability standards. And this is also another reason why we are doing this, because in 2014, when we adopted the code of conduct and when we launched the accountability standards, the current version, we did not have enough time to really go through a consultative process, to really engage in conversation with our members. We did a bit of that, but not much. And I think, and Johnny also mentioned at the beginning, we think the collective ownership is critical here. And as important as the final documents, the process to get to this document is also extremely important for us. It's about creating awareness, having conversations, and involving as many people as possible in this collective vision for how we want to be in the world and how we want the world to be. So here you can see quickly the different activities that we are doing as part of the consultation, involving MenEngage board leaders, regional network leaders. Also, we are reaching out to other feminists who are not part of MenEngage, who of course we feel very accountable to them. And we are in this process of receiving feedback, processing those feedback, and we are planning a new set of this collective discussion in August, and 3 meetings across time zones to discuss the second draft version of these documents. And we aim by the end of this year that the MenEngage board adopt these revised principles, code of conduct, and accountability standards. And this is informed by many activities that we have been doing also before this formal revision: accountability dialogues, accountability trainings within our networks, lessons learned, including our mistakes, lessons learned in the hard way. An accountability survey that we also administered last year with the support of Equality Institute, and also with other organizations, Athena Network, who also have been, we have been together working on accountability dialogues and public debate about accountability for the engaging men and boys field. Critiques, important critiques, such as the critique that was crafted by the coalition Coffin, the feminist critique that we really take very seriously, and is that it really informed these new proposals. So that's all for me, and over back to Yoni to facilitate the great discussion with our speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Oswaldo. Yes, so we would love to hear from Bilkis, Kevin, and Sariaka, and Haja as well in the next round. on your inputs, your reflections on the draft code of conduct. Yeah, so we'll start with that actually. So we'll do two rounds. The first question we would like to focus really on your reflections on the content. So questions around, do you agree what's in the draft code of conduct? Do you agree with the framing? Do you like it? How can we improve it? Do you see any potential gaps? So we're going to be focusing on the contents in this first round, and then the second one we will be talking about your thoughts on application. So you being users as MenEngage members of the code of conduct, yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts, and I suggest we start with Sariaka.
I would say that the code of conduct, as Yoni exposed at the beginning, is a referential document for the members of the network, but also for other people in the organization. It's to see where they are in their personal behaviors and personal beliefs. Do they fit in the MenEngage vision, in the MenEngage box or not? So having this reflection session about the code of conduct is, I think, it's a very important process. It will ensure a transparency and accountability in all level. And as we are, MenEngage is, I think, a organization that is evolving all the time. So we need to reflect regularly in our organization, in our system, to be sure that everything is working towards our goal and our vision. So regarding the new code of conduct, I can say that the first question is like, do you agree? Yes, of course. As a member of the network, and first impression is, I would say the document is clear, very simple, very simple. The new version, I mean, very simple to read, and compares to the old version. It's suits more our goal. But when I compared the two version, I noticed that on the old one, there was a more focus on the gender-based violence and social justice. And in the new one, I don't know. It's more focused on personal behavior. It's more focused on individual than organization. And yeah, that was my first impression. Maybe later I will talk about our experience in spreading this code of conduct. But I don't know if my colleague Adza has something to add right now.
Okay. About the content, because it's still on the first round, uh, I like the framing, the part on the positive list and on the negative list, because, as you said, it is more on individual accountability. So we have to be reminded what we are standing for, but it is also important to remind us what we are standing against and what we shouldn't do. So it is a really good framing. And also, the 12 points are really important, but as Eric said, maybe to be more clear with some points, to be more focused on our area of intervention, to talk more about the gender-based violence and a lot of sexuality, to be more focused on the area, because I think we need clarity. Clarity is needed, and we'll talk more about clarity even in the second part of the process. For example, maybe uh, we need some clarification of few terminologies, because here in Africa, that's what we are seeing. We are using the framework to and send it to new applicants so that they can see, put their signature, and they can join the network. But sometimes even educated people in Madagascar don't really understand some concepts and notions, and maybe a short dictionary terminology clarification on the bottom of the document will be useful, or to clarify it more on inside the paragraphs, but to be more precise on the words we use, maybe using some examples, or doing this terminology as I said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both. And I think both of you referenced that on kind of issues that we work on. So ending gender-based violence, ending sexual harassment, advancing sexual reproductive health and rights, LGBTQI rights comes to mind as well. That there's not a lot of reference to that in the new version. And so I do think that's something to take note of, because I think we have in mind that this is explained in kind of other documents. So, in our guiding principles or in our areas of work, but that maybe some kind of overlap between those documents is not actually a problem, because this is the one where you are saying your members in the Madagascar network, in your example, actually sign on to. And I love hearing that. I think that's really wonderful that it's being put to use, that you are using it in the membership sign-on process. That's great to hear. And also, I know then this is a little bit about the application, but I loved what you were saying, Sariaka, around how important it is to keep reflecting on this and what's in here, and to keep it alive with the membership. So it's also a resource within the MenEngage network building as a guide to determine what our activities, our collective activities, are about. So I thought that was great to hear. Okay, so then I would love to hear from Bilkis.
Thank you very much. I have, okay, in general, I really like the way it has been framed. And to begin with, I must congratulate Osvaldo and the team and the other participants in consultations who have, it's obvious that a lot of hard work has gone into it. I also feel that, and gladly, express that there's less jargon in this code of conduct, more clarity in language. Language is really accessible and simple, so easier to understand. I also appreciate the deep dive into the values of our work. And when I started looking at those values, all of these actually are embedded in various UN, commitments, conventions, treaty bodies, etc. So, in general, I really like the work. What my suggestions would be in terms of how we can improve it, and because gaps and improvement comes together, I'm just making it, one response. I would really like to see more focus on humanitarian response, particularly in terms of COVID now. We don't know how long it's going to be. It has totally changed our ways of working, our ways of dealing with each other, our behaviors. There are mental health issues, there are, emotional issues, there are social issues. So I really can't give you the exact words and phrases at the moment, but I feel that it would enrich it if we were to consider that as well. The second point for improvement would also be around VFM, it's a very strange term, value for money, effectiveness, etc. But really, one of the responsibilities as organizations is also critically analyzing, reflecting. Let me explain it a bit. We are, for example, I'm here because I have a commitment to the communities, to the grassroots level, to the people that I work with. So, one of the added value would be, what is called EFM in terminology. My last point on
Sorry,
this is
Bilkis, can you clarify that? I am not getting the abbreviation.
okay. It's a terminology acronym for value for money, which actually means effectiveness. So it's an practice on accountability and sustainability, a critical analysis of whatever we are spending in our programs also generates value addition for the people that we are working with. And that's, in terms of accountability and sustainability of our interventions. That analysis, persistent analysis, and redirecting our efforts becomes very important. And it's a great value. We can link it with the financial accountability. We can link it with behavioral accountability, and we can also link it with effectiveness agenda and aid effectiveness agenda as well, and the Paris Declaration and all. My last point is, slightly relates to okay. It stems out of the application of the previous conduct, but I think it would be good if we can add what happens to the organizations who do not comply. So, are there any penalties for non compliance? If it's already there in the code of conduct, it's easier then for the leaders to implement it. And I'll talk more about that in the next, round of discussion around application of the code of conduct implementation. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Bilkis. And I think in that second round, Oswaldo, I would also like you actually give you some platform and space to respond to any thoughts that come to your mind. But thank you. I think also you mentioned, Bilkis, the humanitarian response, but it reminds me of centering humans, humanity, human beings, our human interactions, our relationships with each other in the code of conduct. No, not and our accountability to the communities why we are actually organizing MenEngage is to serve our communities and to find ways to anchor and reflect that. I think not only in the code of conduct, but in all of our principles as well. So, Kevin, I would love to hear from you as well at this point.
Thank you very much, Yoni. I would like to start my reflection on how the session today was titled Be the Change We Want to See. And I feel that if there were to be a tagline for the Code of Conduct, that would be a very fitting tagline, because as my colleagues from Madagascar mentioned, the Code of Conduct really focuses on that personal transformation, which I appreciate, because we know that for change to be sustainable, people must believe in the change, and people must commit to the change in their lives themselves. I see a lot of the values of the spirit of Ubuntu coming out of the code of conduct. And there's a statement that begins by saying we all have a responsibility to contribute to the well-being of every member of the alliance. And I find that really powerful, and something that is, something that we should all strive to. one thing that I would like to see to improve the code, there is a part that calls on us to practice the code in all aspects of our lives, in our families, communities, and organizations and networks. And I feel that it can be strengthened if we add also in our private life, because and make that emphasize that distinction between our family life and our private life, because as we know, a lot of unethical and scandalous uh, behavior happens within very deep privacy. So, just reinforcing to members who sign on to the code that, as the quote goes, the measure of our character is who we are when no one is looking. So just re-emphasizing that. If I were to mention in terms of gaps, one of the gaps that I came across was on the section of consent. And close to the end of that section, there is a phrase that says we abide by international laws regarding consent in sexual relations. And I struggled a bit with that because I was asking myself, what does that mean? Which international laws? We know that across the world there is no common legal definition for consent, and different international jurisdictions approach it differently. So I feel that we could, either clarify exactly what we refer to consent as, take that step beyond what the law has been able to achieve and really clarify what we mean by consent in sexual relationships. Um, but overall, I fully agree with the code of conduct. I see no hesitation in the network in the Caribbean, accepting this code of conduct and framing our work, flowing out of the principles and values expressed herein.
Thank you so much, Kevin. And I really love how you center, and I think that's the intention with the code of conduct, that the purpose is to create a safe community and a community of support, and where we really feel connected with each other, and where I am concerned about the well-being and how of the others within MenEngage, no, and how I show up, that I make sure I apply do no harm principles, that I really support and want to take care of the others in the community, and I love that. Thank you. So then let's focus a little bit more on the application. Some of you have already made some suggestions for that, but we will do a deeper dive now, and going back, maybe just kind of in the same order that we heard from you before, starting with Sariaka and Hasha.
As you may know, we are using the code of conduct and as a main document to sign for organizations that want to be part of our network, of MenEngage Madagascar network. And we use also the code of conduct to train the new members about what is MenEngage, what are we standing for, how should we behave, etc. And using this, as this is a very clear and very simple document, people, some organizations do not sign and don't want to integrate the network because of the LGBTQA plus statement in the code of conduct, and also on the alcohol and drugs. In Africa, we do have a code of conduct for MenEngage Africa, and there is a clear statement about alcohol and drugs. And I think it is fine if some organizations do not want to join the network, because they don't accept some values. And the code of conduct is has to be very precise like this, so that things are clear at the beginning, so there is no error and there is no hidden message or hidden vision, I don't know. And having this kind of statement very clear and very simple about our vision help us to communicate very clearly about MenEngage, about our vision. And so people join or not, it's fine, but still we should uh, we should have like this very straight, clear, and simple document. At
Thanks, Sarik. As Sarik has said, it's all about clarity and to be straightforward as much as possible. About the second point, I want to say that the code of conduct is, as Sarika said, it is the document that we send to applicants that they will sign to join the network. But also we have to teach it to our members, new members or already existing members. So for this update, how can we conduct the implementation within members and within the applicants? The 12 points of the new code of conduct are really clear and really important points. Maybe we thought about declining the points into short trainings and short videos that we will send to our already existing members to clarify what terminologies we are important on each point. For example, about consent, we will define what is consent, what is coercion, what is everything related to this point of consent. In transparency, we will decline it. We will have dot points about what is transparency, give examples, and giving a lot of contextualization, and declining for these 12 points into 12 little short training session and short videos or short documents of training. That's that we want to do, and maybe we will do. We will share, we will organize a meeting with a representative of the organization or with the organization and trying to ask them if they still agree with this updated version. Of course, I think they will, but it is important to them to update their engagement about the code of conduct, as we say that the signature of the code of conduct is the main engagement of the members. So even existing members should should re-engage themselves by signing this new code of conduct, followed by the training, or we will train them and see if they want if they still want to sign the document. And with new applicants, maybe we will put a little bit of clarification, as we said, about some terminologies, because we want to be clear as possible about what people are signing for. They will join us for what exactly. So we want to be clear as possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And yeah, again, I think it's really wonderful to hear how you are using the code of conduct in practice to orient members and to engage them in conversation on what MenEngage is about, and wonderful idea on how to develop training materials to contextualize and deepen kind of what is there written in only in a few words. Thank you for those. And back to you, Bilkis. Any thoughts from your side on the application?
Actually, many. Because, I mean, like, Sri Lanka and Haja mentioned, we are also, having in Pakistan, we are having members sign on the code of conduct, and because we began in 2007. So when the code of conduct, was shared, we asked the members to sign on that as well. However, there have been many, many challenges in implementation and particularly in compliance. So the first challenge for us was that the understanding of values mentioned in the code of conduct were not clearly understood. Everyone was not on the same page in understanding what it means. So we had to have several trainings around that. And the understanding is also particularly limited because NGOs mushroomed during conflict and disasters, particularly in South Asia. So the way NGO movement had begun with a lot of values and a lot of commitment to social change was slightly the atmosphere, the milieu was changed a little bit. In terms of compliance, we have had in Pakistan, we have had two instances where we had to deal with organizations who had not complied and totally violated the code of ethics. And there were several risks related to that. The first one, although, the steering group, it was not done only by the Secretariat, it was led by the steering committee of MenEngage Alliance. It polarized the alliance because then this strange lobbying around, went on. Although in both cases, the cases were proven, and there were, there was evidence that violations had occurred. Then there was, a reputational risk around the members of the steering group against their organizations, because then people began, talking about that to the donors, to other people. There's also a risk of having legal, if anyone takes a legal action, an organization decides to take a legal action, when you want to talk to them, dialogue with them on compliance, even when you're trying to offer, support, there's always that risk. And then there are within the organizations and at the level of individuals also. Individuals, I mean leaders of MenEngage also. There's this, various agendas, and even today we get recommendations about these organizations who had eventually left MenEngage Alliance because they keep lobbying against that. So what I was saying earlier, that in the code of conduct, we should clearly mention what happens if an organization does not comply, and maybe later follow it up with a process, step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like we have for harassment. And then around suggestions, networks to dialogue on the new code of conduct, to orient their members on the new code of conduct, training tools. I really love the idea of short videos on values or animations, and I would really suggest that these tools be developed at the global level, and then other people can adapt and adopt and contextualize. Training of network members, I've already mentioned. And I also had an idea if there could be a self assessment scorecard which, the members could rate themselves on through a self-reflective process on an annual basis, and then perhaps share it with the network, so that the net in a constructive manner, so that the network can then provide the level of support that's required. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Bilkis. And I mean, taking good note of the practical suggestions that you've provided. What came to mind in the example that you were sharing around, violations of the code of conduct and new member organizations, or perhaps standing member organizations of MenEngage, not complying with what's in the code of conduct and not with the principles. We have been also held to account, I think, by feminist colleagues when they see that MenEngage members are not in compliance. And one person at some point raised that it seems like there's been so much scale up of MenEngage, in the sense that there have been it's a growth in the network, and so many new organizations have joined. And in that process, questioning whether we've always been clear about what does it mean to be a MenEngage member. And at some point, it seems that the growing the network has been favored over really deepening the work and the understanding of what we are about. So I think in the last period, and with the process we're conducting now to update the code of conduct, it's an opportunity to get our values clearer, and to really make very clear what it is that MenEngage as a collective and MenEngage members stand for. And so we are not representing all of the work in the world on engaging men. We are representing that kind of work that really resides and resonates with the principles as we've outlined them. So one of the things in the code of conduct is we reflect on our own power and privilege. And we do that on an ongoing basis. And those are pretty profound things to put in practice. And I don't think all of the work engaging men and boys focuses on that. And I think it's really important, and it distinguishes MenEngage Alliance from other work. Same that we do not support, the so-called men's rights movement, but we firmly implement intersectional feminist principles. So I just wanted to kind of share that reflection on the process of growth that we've seen, and the challenges that come with that, and the opportunity for us now to clarify. Okay, so Kevin, would love to hear from you as well on the application part.
So in the past, the leaders within the Caribbean region have used the code of conduct as a starting point to develop our own code of conduct here. So members would have gone through different exercises to sort of contextualize and expand on different values within MenEngage code of conduct to develop our own Carryman code of conduct. One of the things that we know is that the code of conduct represents a statement of values. And in order for it to be meaningfully implemented across a region, it requires very clear policies and protocols and systems that monitor the implementation, but also monitor any or mitigate against any risk of breaches to the code. So I think it would be important for networks to be in sync with MenEngage in terms of policies. So like if I'm thinking the Caribbean should have a body of policies that match the MenEngage policy if we are to follow the code, because the code is a very broad statement of value. I support the ideas of training tools and using the code as this personal and institutional transformation process, and ideas like Bilkis would have shared about developing videos and other resources to support networks. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. So I think, yeah, you also reiterate support for the mechanisms and what happens when a violation has taken place. Also, how do we seek to prevent, how do we mitigate, and the link with the policies that we have. As you said, these are only broad statements, but policies and mechanisms would allow us to go deeper and would allow us to be clear on how to respond when there has been a violation. And also thank you for making the links with the regional contextualization again. And I loved what you were saying. It's contextualization and expanding. No, so how do we, I think, not compromise? And Sariaka also mentioned this, you have in the Africa region the global code of conduct and the MenEngage Africa one. So how can we regionally, locally uphold the same standards, but contextualize perhaps the language and, as you were saying, expand? So not water down in any way what we're committed to, but expand or deepen. That's really helpful. Thank you. So then I would love to now pass it on to Srilatha. Thank you again for being here with us. Any reflections that you have on what you've heard so far from the others, and also what you've written in the Code of Conduct, and from your large experience in what you have said, we need to clarify our fundas, our fundamental principles. Really looking forward to hear from you.
Thanks, Johnny. Am I audible?
Yes, you are very well.
Okay, great. So I'm also going to share screen in a minute, but I just wanted to start by saying that I, like to join others in congratulating MenEngage for having taken this process on not only so seriously but so methodically, and also very democratically, that you are in a process of refreshing and updating and revising the code of conduct, rather than treating it as some sort of one static set of principles like the 10 Commandments in the Bible that are for all time. I think it's really important what you're doing, and I want to express my appreciation for that. Like others, I have nothing but positive comments on the revised code as I have seen it. I think it's made a lot of progress, actually quite radical progress over the previous version, which was a good, sort of statement of intentions, but I think this is much clearer. I also wanted to mention, in response to, something that was raised earlier, that there's this interesting point about, is a code of conduct for individuals or organizations or both? Yeah. And I think here, there is the sort of first conundrum in the code of conduct. I think you've attempted to deal with it, because you've said, okay, these are for individuals and members of the alliance, etc. But I think it's really perhaps an interesting challenge to say, in the code of conduct, what are the sort of standards of behavior that we expect of any individual in an organization that is part of the alliance, and therefore wants to kind of ally itself with our values, our standards. So what is the behavior expected of any individual within the organizations that are part of the alliance? By saying that, what you're also saying to the organization is that you have to, in some manner, both equip individuals you recruit, capacitate them, but also enforce these standards on your individual, team members. And then to sort of tackle the challenge of what are organizational behavioral standards. Because the two are not necessarily, the core values may be the same, but, an organization. Now, Bilkis just gave us an excellent example of how organizations behave when they are in a situation where organizationally they are seen as having violated. How do they behave? Okay, they lobby, they go to donors, they do this, they do that. What are the kind of standards of conduct that we expect from organizations? So I'm not saying I have an answer to this, but it has struck me just listening to these very perceptive comments that that is something perhaps worth looking into. What are these individual standards and what are the organizational standards in terms of a code of conduct? Okay, so let me just quickly walk through the presentation. Hopefully everyone can see my screen. What I have done is, of course,
Srilatha, we can see it yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, now it's up. Yeah.
You can see it now? Okay.
Yes.
So
yes.
of course my mind goes straight to implementation, because what I wanted to say is that is this code of conduct the ideal one, the perfect one? No, I don't know. Nobody knows. All we know is that it's the next best version that we can create, right? Right now, this is our process has led to next best version of code of conduct. So I don't think we should get caught up with, is this the perfect set of standards? Is it the most complete? Doesn't matter, because this is where we are right now. Let's start with this. And starting with this means, how do we implement it? How do we make it implementable for our members of the Alliance and their teams? So I wanted to start with this, which has been raised, I think, by all of the respondents so far, which is the very simple fact that although we have the universal, human rights values and so on, the fact is that certain core values are understood very differently and practiced very differently in different contexts, right? So for instance, how is respect or fairness or discrimination understood in different contexts, in different cultures and settings is really key. And so I think it's actually important, and it is part of our process of the mechanisms, as Kevin said. What are the systems, the protocols, the steps we have to take to make this real, to make it actionable, and to make it alive, is we have to actually look at how are these, and that's an exercise, that's a process. So when I say respect in South Asia, and in fact, I think in many, many cultures around the world, respect means I don't talk back to people older than me. I don't challenge, but what I might do is or talk about them in the corridor, run them down to somebody else, etc. Because I don't have a mechanism for speaking up to someone who's either senior to me in hierarchy or older than me in the age hierarchy or superior to me.
Srilatha, I see you're back, but we lost you for a moment.
Okay, let's try one more time and hope for the best. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I was saying, it's a point that has been made already, but this is to me, a very, very important and critical dimension of making the code of conduct a live tool. So basically, what we need a very transparent, clear, and very sort of concrete process to each context, So the example Kevin gave, that they developed their code of conduct, let's call it the global MenEngage code of conduct as the sort of base starting point or the template, but they developed a kind of code of their region, sort of grounding it and embedding it in their local context to make it very real. But we need a process to come to agreement in each context on what is the bottom line or the denominator or shared standard that everyone must abide by in each context. This led me to think about what is, we can't take it for granted. And I think the examples Bilkis gave us illustrate that very, that everyone or every organization will have the capacity actually implement the code of conduct. Yeah, they may have the intent. When you say, okay, sign here on this line with these values, everybody say, okay, fine, this is fine, I agree to this. Nobody wants to say, no, I don't agree with respect. I don't agree with non-discrimination. Everybody's going to say, yes, I agree, and I sign up for this. But the fact is that when many of these norms, I'm going to be a bit extreme here and say, let's suppose they're actually antithetical. They are absolutely contrary and contradictory to the socio-cultural norms of the society I'm located in. That society has compelled me to internalize keeping silent, not interfering, not challenging authority, backbiting, speaking in the corridor, pulling people down in subversive ways because I can't confront them directly, keeping things a bit secret. So we actually need to invest time, energy, and methods like, has been talked about already, trainings and so on, in building the capacity to practice these norms. What does it look like if I have to, and say, okay, this is a space in which we are going to maybe contradict external social norms because we believe in these values, and this is how we can do it, and what capacity of yours needs to be built to actually gradually come to practice this norm in this. Because remember that a code of conduct is a normative framework, right? It's a normative framework, and we can't assume that everybody has the capacity to implement it. And I wanted to share that in my experience, rather than, when we say training, often our trainings, I'm not saying that any of you have done these type of trainings, but often trainings are talk shops or lecture shops where I tell you, you mustn't behave like this, you should do this, you should, it's a lot of sort of lecturing people, and they shut down because somewhere we don't create a space in those trainings for people's actual real feelings and, more importantly, fears and anxieties to be placed on the table. Yeah. So I found, because I did a lot of things in my grassroots work that were very antithetical to dominant social norms. We used theater, we used music, we used performance, we used dance, we used films, we used songwriting, poems, all sorts of creative forms. And there is now a whole set of people around the world who are really working on individual and collective healing in social change context. So I just wanted to bring in that whole dimension of using a lot of creative methods to build capacity, and also that we have to address and confront the issue of healing, and really addressing the fact that we're going against internalized behavior. So gosh, I better run because I have a hard stop at 8, as I told you. Okay, a missing element, if any, that I had to identify, which again perhaps comes into implementation and not necessarily in the code, but just thought you could consider. Have we dealt with conflict? Because we've dealt with fraud, corruption, sexual harassment, all these kind of things. But so this was, I think, Bilkis's point, that when principles are violated, what do you do? So what are the penalties? I think that's one question that has to be answered. Maybe in the end of the code of conduct or something like that. But also, what do you do when these conflicts arise? These conflicts could be between individuals. They could be between different teams in the organization. Classically, the leadership team versus, the staff team or whatever. So the he says, she says kind of scenario, or groups in conflict, or in fact between members within the alliance, such as the example that Bilkis gave, where one member has violated and they have been asked to leave the alliance, and then they take certain kinds of actions in retaliation and so on. So I feel it would be good if the code of conduct could grapple with the whole issue of conflict. Like, what's the code of conduct for individuals and organizations when there is a conflict in the organization? And often the conflict will occur around these core values and behaviors which we are asking them to comply with. So as Kevin says, I feel we really need to focus on, or maybe recommend, a set of mechanisms that need to be set up to handle conflict in a way that reflect our principles of accountability, reflect our values, and also reflect this fairness, transparency, respect, etc. And I wanted to suggest, this can go into my last section, but this needs to include independent external, ombudspersons or mentors to help resolve conflicts in an impartial and objective way. So in closing, I wanted to suggest that perhaps the code of conduct becomes the sort of core starting point document that, these are the standards for individuals and organizations, but we need to develop a toolbox for the implementation. Now, the toolbox can have some generic toolkits and some very much more contextualized, localized toolkits. And here are some suggestions I wanted to offer for the toolbox. One is a toolkit to actually help individuals locate gaps in personal challenge. What challenge am I going to face in treating a person of a different sexual orientation as an equal when I have been brought up to believe that that person is a pervert and is abnormal? I'm just putting it in a very sharp way. Okay. Now, I've signed the code of conduct that I will not practice discrimination, including homophobia. But inside, I am homophobic. Perhaps that's not even my doing. I've been brought up this way. I believe this is against my religion. It's against, God, whatever. So what are going to be my personal challenges in abiding to these standards of behavior? I feel we actually need to help people identify those gaps in a supportive way, not as, oh, you're such a bad person because you're a homophobe, but how can we support you to bridge this gap? And what is the standard of behavior, regardless of your personal belief? What's the distance you have to walk between your home and here? Then comes, of course, the messy question which Kevin raised, which is really important. Does it then mean it's okay for you to be homophobic in your community or in your home or whatever? It's not. But at least as far as the organizational behavior is concerned, how do we help you get there? Because maybe if we can help you get there, then you can get there in other private spaces. We need a toolkit for mapping how the core values are understood and enacted in different cultures, and methodologies for closing those gaps. And the methodologies need to include, we need a big resource bank, examples, case stories, simulations, games, theater, other creative methods that have been used so effectively in different parts of the world. In fact, in working on masculinity, so much of this stuff has been developed that we need to actually make accessible and available to people so that they can really do these kinds of trainings with a lot more impact than talk shops lecturing people on how they should behave. I really believe we need to explore. I'm not saying we have all the answers, but to explore what are healing processes that actually help with individual and collective healing. And if you look at websites like Root, Rise, Pollinate, or Healing Solidarity, and there's a lot of work going on in this field that's really important. And I feel the toolkit should include access to that. I think this important point that Kevin raised about the legal frameworks, what are they? So I think it would be interesting if each, say, regional or national toolbox included what are the national legal standards and provisions, and what are the international standards and codes and treaties, etc., so that people also understand what are the legal mechanisms operating. I am a strong advocate today of mentoring. Individual and organizational mentoring, I think, is really important. It's a very underutilized methodology and input into building organizational capacity and transformation processes. And perhaps we could look at setting up regional and national panels of mentors to help and support organizations that are really trying to go through this transformation and implement the code of conduct. Conflict management and resolutions, again, there's a lot of stuff available, ideas, case studies, examples of how things have been handled. And so I'm saying we need a kind of implementation guide overall that accompanies the code of conduct. Yeah. So that there's a step-by-step sort of guide for how to implement it and how to enforce it. So people don't feel that, oh, here's this very high and mighty code of conduct and I have no support and no ideas in how to implement it. Yeah, so let me stop there and thank you so much. It was really, really interesting to go through this process, and I was really happy to be given an opportunity to be part of this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Srilatha. And I see we have a comment a question in the chat box. I'll ask it really quickly because I know you have to leave in about 2 minutes. When you say healing, do you mean healing from patriarchal indoctrination and or healing from something else? Yeah.
Yes, I mean both. I mean both. A lot of the kind of behaviors that lead to, say, sexual harassment or let's say, racial or caste discrimination in an organization. I don't know. I think it's a deep philosophical question. Is that my personal healing, or am I a product of a societal, structure that has sanctioned these practices, right? So I think that's not a useful question to pursue. I think what is useful to look at is how can we actually give people access to resources that both acknowledge their individual trauma and pain, which may make it hard for them. That's why I'm saying, let's start with asking people, what would be hard for you to practice? Would it be hard for me to confront discrimination if it's coming from a superior in the organization or an older man or something? I think it's just important to say, okay, so first we acknowledge that this is where it's going to be hard for me. And how can I heal from this? So I'm using healing in that very broad way, But some of it may actually be individual trauma, that I just don't trust people. I'm referring back to our Tuesday plenary. I don't trust someone because they are Hutu or they are Tutsi or they took part in this genocide against my community, and now you're asking me to work with this person and treat them as an equal. I'm going to find that hard. How do we make a safe space for people to acknowledge those gaps that they are experiencing, and then to, transcend those, to use Kike's word, to forgive, and also to heal from that and find a new way of being. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think that's a recognition that people may want to, in theory, support things, but that there's pain, whether it's individual, whether it's societal, there are restrictions, there are fears, so if we don't deal with those bottlenecks, we cannot go through them. And healing as
and I'm not suggesting that MenEngage can provide the solutions for it, but I think it's important for us in our toolbox, our step-by-step implementation guide, to acknowledge this, to recognize this, and to link people to resources that they can access to do that process at the organizational level. So I'm so sorry I must leave now, but thank you so much. Nice seeing you again, Kevin and Bilkis, and great meeting you, Haja and Saryaka. Good luck with all this, and count on me for any ongoing support. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. And
Bye.
thanks to everybody for what you've shared so far. We are going to continue for a little while longer, for about half an hour. We wanted to first give the floor to Oswaldo for a couple of minutes, as some practical questions and suggestions have come up, and just to hear some reflections from him, and maybe to contextualize and share a bit about how we have been handling, or how we're thinking of handling, some of the things that came up. And after doing that, we would like to go into a brief breakout group, as the platform is not allowing us to unmute, but we would like to just hear from you a bit more directly. So what we would want to do is go in a breakout. Oswaldo, do you have an idea how many people?
Right. We are here. Let me see. I don't see the number of participants right now. 21. So maybe we can have a 4 groups. Oh, there are some people in the waiting room. Maybe we can have 3 or 4 groups for some discussion. That could be doable, I would think, or maybe some 15-minute discussion. And I know I can provide some more information about this great reflection that we are having right now. I really appreciate each of the points made by each of the speakers, by Srilatha. We are taking notes, profound notes of all of this, and great that this is a recording. This is a tool that we're going to use this session for improving the draft proposal that we have. And we're going to take all of your ideas. I mean, the glossary, the tagline, using the taglines Kevin is suggesting that we can use, the some of the gaps about the consent, which is very tricky, and to what extent can we need to really be more clear about what we mean by consent. And each of your ideas, I think they are very important. And I want to say that we are also working on implementing the sexual harassment policy, and as part of that, we are also putting together a toolkit for moving with this reflection. So some of the great ideas that Srilatha is telling us about the toolbox is something that we are working on, and the previous accountability standards also involved a toolkit, a training toolkit. So we're going to use that as well. We are not starting from scratch, and definitely we can build from that, and also build from the resources that you have in your regions, in organizations, because we know that the most important part is about education, about raising our awareness and raising our skills. It's not a legalistic, punitive framework that we are putting forward. is quite the opposite. And that's why I think that some of the reflection brought by Srilatha about having a trauma-informed approach is so important. It's so important because we have to recognize many of our wrongdoings come from our own wounds, our own unhealed processes. So I really welcome that, and we welcome your support in order to have a collective own set of tools and common agreements on this. So I don't know, Johnny, if we are missing something in terms of response or clarification so far, and if we can move on
I think let's move into the breakout rooms. We'll have 4 groups, so there would be around 4 people, I think, in each group. And just share any reflections on what you've heard so far, any suggestions, any questions you're struggling with. I would suggest use the time wisely. So do speak, do take the floor, check your airtime, make sure that everybody in the group has had a chance to share their perspectives. And then we'll go back to the main room and just, if one person per group could just, for a couple of minutes, share some of the main kind of questions or ideas that came up, that would be great. I will stay in the main room, and also just saying, if there's anybody who needs language interpretation, then also please stay in the main room. Or, you may go into the breakout room and then come back if that is how the system is set up.
And we put in the chat the link to the draft revised code of conduct, so you can click on it to refer in the discussion. And please do that. And Yoni, don't click on the invitation because I'm sending everybody to the breakout rooms, but you can stay in the main room.
Okay, sounds good.
Hi, Yoni. This is Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
I wanted just to share some additional feedback. I didn't want to go into the breakout room because I felt as if it would hog a lot of the time.
Okay, yeah, of course. I did.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to read it about 4 times. So
amazing.
Yeah, I felt it could be a bit unbalanced if I go into the room. So I'm going through by sections, right? So on the section of respect, there is a part that says we are mindful of the impact of unequal power dynamics in our relationship, in our relations with others, right? However, I was asking the question, after being mindful of that impact of unequal power, what next? Are we going to strive for power balance in our relations, or look for ways to balance off the power? So I was asking, we should add that we're taking a step further than just being mindful of the power imbalance. On the section that deals with fairness, there is a statement that says we aim to see and treat others as equals. And I would ask for that word aim, the aim to be removed, and just make a brief statement as we see and treat others as equal. Because it sends a more powerful message. Also within that section, we make opportunities equitably available to all who meet the specific requirements for new initiatives. I see there both equity and meritocracy in that same statement. And I see that challenges. So, I mean, what I would recommend is that, we end the statement at we make opportunities equitably available to all, or, we state something that how, we recognize that not everyone has the same starting point, and, the playing field is not level for everyone, but that part there that speaks to specific requirements for new initiatives introduces an element that may not create a level playing field, or may erode equity, because some people may have different access and privilege. So So I just was concerned about that. And
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
last comment I have is on the section with transparency. And
Mm-hmm.
there is that sentence there that says, our promises are made in good faith, even though we may not deliver as expected. Right? Are you seeing that
Yeah,
sentence?
yeah, got it.
And I feel as if that sentence may be undermining a statement made earlier under respect, which says, we recognize that the intentions of our actions are not the primary consideration, but the impact of our actions. So it seems as if we're saying something that contradicts that statement when it comes to us in MenEngage, that, well, our promises are in good faith, even though our actions are
Yeah,
not delivered, but we're saying that, intent is not the primary thing, impact is. So I think just making the statement that our promises are made in good faith, without adding that part, the even though we may not deliver as expected, I think should be enough for there. But I just felt as if it was undermining that previous um, value statement above. Yes, and
yeah.
that's it there. That's it there for me in terms of my comments.
Thank
We
you
are
so
Um,
much.
we are back. Everybody's back to the main room. The breakout rooms did not work well for many people. So some might have some conversation, but I believe most of them couldn't.
Okay, so I'm also not sure if everybody's back, but then I'm gonna look at Tami-san, and if you can just give everybody the opportunity to be able to unmute themselves, and we just open the floor for yeah what you would want to share. And thank you, Kevin, for just taking that extra space, which is super helpful. And all of your comments have been added in the Google Doc now. So are there other people who would like to share any thoughts? Jan, go ahead.
Yes. Well, first of all, I think it's a very timely moment to reflect on the code of conduct, partly because MenEngage is changing, but also the world is changing. But it also means that I think we should raise our bar a bit higher. We've been talking for quite some time now, since Delhi, about feminist system change. And I do not really see that yet reflected in our code of conduct. And what I mean by saying that is that we should prevent not to be a hindrance to feminist system change. And that is one thing that I put it already in the chat before. And another one, which is the positive side of speaking up for gender, for justice. Speaking up for justice, you can do at any moment. But the other side is to prevent being a bystander. And that's almost like a sort of a duty you have at every single moment. And the bystander could be at the level of what sort of witnessing abuse, witnessing gender-based violence, witnessing overstepping boundaries, but it could also be being part of the change system thinking. From the change, if you are against, if you really want to change system, then you have to consider that in all the things you do, not just in the gender aspects of the life. No? Because we talk about environmental issues, we talk about all these different issues. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you. And I saw these two suggestions from you also coming by in the chat box, so we have them there, and we've taken note of them here. Thank you. And I also have seen that there is a question from Mangesh. Mangesh, do you want to unmute yourself and share your question with the group?
Yeah, no, it's very briefly, it's this. Over the last some years, we've seen globally, and also, of course, in South Asia, a situation where, these sorts of issues, the conflicts, as Srilatha Batliwala so correctly put it, they surface, after simmering for long, sometimes for over years. And then they become very murky, and it becomes very difficult to resolve these kinds of issues. So that's why I just asked, is there some sort of early warning system, some way of responding early to these situations, even for somebody who is feeling they are at the wrong end of the stick, as it were, that for them to speak up, something of the sort, rather than it's good to have biased sentiments and principles in place, but unless we have protocols, then it becomes difficult in practice to implement them. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. And I think, yeah, you summarized it in the end. It speaks to the protocols and mechanisms, the need for those. Oswald, I'm not sure if you want to respond more specifically.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the whole point made by MenEngage. I heard about having like an early warning system, but then I missed the last part of his point. Sorry about that.
Yeah, so if I may paraphrase, I think it's, oh yeah. I think very often what we do is we have mechanisms and responses for the moment something has gone wrong.
Would you like to?
Mangesh, it's quite strange. We can hear you even though I see you are muted.
There is a quick response. Then allowing.
But you are breaking up. The line is breaking up. We can't hear you clearly.
Oh, I see he put something in the chat. Do you have an early warning alert action provision in the code of conduct? When the situation deteriorates and becomes murky, it gets more and more difficult to conduct a fair inquiry and bring about a just resolution. And yes, I think it's important to see the code of conduct in the context of the accountability framework, so that the accountability standards states that we have to act promptly. We have to. We cannot afford delays in taking action, in finding out, asking questions, inquiring, responding to people who come forward with concerns. So there are a set of guidelines in the accountability framework that I think support what MenEngage is telling us. It's very important. We might need to say that explicitly in each of these documents, the relationship with the other documents. And this also speaks to Jan's point, which I agree, about system change. Yes, we need to be more explicit about that in the code of conduct, even though the code of conduct is more a tool for individual behavior. And yet, it's interconnected with the systemic and the collective. And so we need to make those interlinkages better so that they are not seen as isolated tools. So we are taking note of that as well. Still, we want to have an emphasis on the behaviors at the individual levels. And I think Srilatha explained very nicely about how these individuals' behaviors that are expected implies responsibilities for organizations or institutions in terms of creating an environment that is conducive to that, and also taking action when those expected behaviors are not observed, and when we breach the code of conduct. So it's interconnected. It's a complex process of being explicit, and yes, we need your help in getting more clarity on these documents.
Thank you, Oswaldo. And it does make me realize that if the code of conduct is kind of the main one where members really sign on to, how do we ensure that the link with the principles are clear, with our areas of work are clear, or so that those do not fall out of perspective. One thought that also came to mind, I think, Oswaldo, currently we do not have reference anymore to our do no harm principle. And that is in the current code of conduct, but not in the updated one. And I realize it's actually one that we have used quite regularly to respond when something goes wrong within the MenEngage network, no? Then we can say, well, you may not be actively wanting to support something, but we are committed to our do no harm principles. And somebody or an organization has come forward to say, I experience harm. and so that means that our mechanism needs to start operating, and we need to respond. And
Yes,
that's, I think, next step is the healing process that Srilatha was referring to. But yeah,
agree. We need to be explicit on the do no harm principle, both for the code of conduct and also for the accountability standards. I think we have it there, but we need to have it in both the language. It helps.
right. So wondering if any other people who have joined us in this room here have any thoughts. Sikandar, Philip, Sanjay, Makeshi, Ashish, I think. Yeah, we have not heard from you. Would love to hear from you. So if any of you would like to share something, please do unmute yourself or share a comment in the chat. And if you don't, that's also fine. We definitely know that people are also joining these conversations merely for listening and food for thought, and not always necessarily for contributing, but you're very welcome to. Go ahead, Mangesh.
Yoni, may I?
Yes,
I
go ahead.
just wanted to ask or suggest that, is it at all possible to have, or do you actually have, I mean, of course, do we have MenEngage, any sort of documentation pertaining to the handling of, such cases? Because unfortunately, in the last some years, such cases have come up and has had to deal with them. And is there some documentation, etc., which is transparently available to learn from? Maybe there are people who are doing research, or activists who want to learn from this. So that's what I just wanted to know.
Thank you. That thought has come to mind multiple occasions, and it came up today as well. We don't have them as such, but it does seem to be a good idea. I think up to date we haven't put our resources towards documentation, but I agree it does keep coming up as something that would be useful. Also in terms, yeah, especially in terms of mechanisms and how to respond, to give ideas on how to respond. Not sure if you want to share any thoughts about that, Oswaldo?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the whole conversation because of noise here.
If we have any documentations of how issues have been handled so far.
Yes, we do. In cases, in the cases in which global MenEngage has had an active part in addressing, and we know some of previous leaders in the network and we documented, and also there are some public communication about some of these cases that are in our website as well, regarding previous what we consider breaches to our code of conduct and principles. And we are learning from them, and those also inform much of what we are proposing as for the new framework, based on mistakes, based on the complexities of these cases. We know each case is complex, and these tools only provides a guideline for that. But then there is also the need for creative and sensitive responses, case by case, situation by situation.
Yes, thank you, Oswaldo. And let me clarify my response, because I think there's a difference between documentation of case handling, which is something that we have to do. No, it's important that we keep track of how the cases were handled. But they're not necessarily, I think, case studies presentable like in a workshop or training, or that we would put online as examples of how we've handled. So just to clarify the difference there in how I understood the question and how Oswaldo responded. And Bilkis is saying, I think it's more about case management. Bilkis, do you want to share your thoughts there? And then I think we will start moving towards rounding off.
Yeah, actually, what I thought was I think I have previously said that as well, and I think Mangesh ji also was referring to that, more on how to handle a case. So, case management, documentation on case management, so kind of toolkit on what would be the first response, what is the kind of support that one can provide, where does mentoring comes in, where does team building come in, etc., etc. So, in terms of how to manage a case of non-compliance, that's what I understood from Mangesh.
Yes, thank you. And it does speak to the need for mechanisms, no? And clarity on how to respond. And for me, that is the thought that I would like to round off with. It's been really inspiring and helpful, practically helpful, to get all your inputs on the draft code of conduct so far. And I think, there are definitely ways that we can further, I would say, tweak, because overall it seems that what is there, the content, people are positive about it. It feels, it resonates, it makes sense. But there are tweaks that need to be made. But also, and you all mentioned that the practical sides, the implementation, the working with the membership, the case handling, as well as on the prevention side, I think the opportunity to use the code of conduct of, clarifying the standards that we have as MenEngage members and as a collective. So I think it's a clear call to action for not hovering, as Srilatha was saying, over the content for too long. Get practical. For me, that's a key takeaway from this conversation. I think you've shared a lot of suggestions for how we can do, and we'll also get back to you as learn, I think, from the global coordination level on how you've been using the code of conduct in your own context. So thank you for that. Then I think my final role is to share a little bit about the ongoing program of the Ubuntu Symposium. As you may know, we are closing on the 22nd of June. We will have a closing program that day. But before that, the coming weeks, we continue with Tuesday plenaries, Wednesday sessions, and organized by the regional networks, and Thursdays parallel sessions such as these today. This is the announcement of the closing on the 22nd of June. Please start marking your calendars. We will have a 4-hour program. I think it starts at 2 or 3 p.m. Kigali time. I'm not sure, to be honest. Please do go to the app and go to the website, and you will all be receiving the email as well with the program at the start of next week, and the weekly recap on Friday. Yes, Bilkis.
Can I just, do a spiel on our session on 27th, 5 p.m. Pakistan time? We have a session on IFIs, international finance institutions, accountability to women's agency and voice. So please, we will circulate it tonight, the invitation. But please, you're very welcome to come in and make your input. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bilkis. Okay, with that, we will round off. Thank you so much again for being here. Thank you, Sariaka, Hashra, Bilkis, and Kevin. Yes, you're still with us, for sharing your thoughts. It was really, really helpful. And thanks to everybody for being here and participating. And we'll see you, I'm sure, on the next session.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.